In this unit, we will explore the period in Greek history known as the Archaic Age. And of course, the Archaic Age is going to be keenly important in the overall rebuilding or redevelopment of Greek civilization after the catastrophic collapse of the Mycenaean civilization that had dominated the Bronze Age in ancient Greece. Now, just a word on terminology. The Archaic Age is an art history term. It is a term used to describe the type of art that has been recovered and dated to the period between 750 and 500 BCE. And archaic refers to old fashioned. And this, of course, applies to the type of art in a sense, old fashioned meaning stiff and not as lifelike as later Greek sculpture would be in representing the human form. In this timeline, we see, of course, various periods of the Greek art, and we begin, of course, with the Minoan Mycenaean. The Mycenaean Greeks will be heavily influenced by Minoan art forms. Then, after the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, when Greece enters that Dark Age period, the type of art that will be recovered will be referred to as geometric because of its geometric patterns, very reminiscent of Near Eastern pottery. And the Dark Age, the later Dark Age, geometric period, will then give way, of course, to the area we were about to explore, the Archaic period, where we see, of course, these stiff and well, I guess we can refer to them as lifeless when compared to the later classical and Hellenistic periods where the human form is depicted much more realistically. But the archaic art forms, the sculpture that has been recovered from Greece, is very similar to Egyptian art, roughly from an earlier period. And we continue to see through the art how Greece has been influenced by the various neighboring civilizations, the older and more established neighboring civilizations. First, of course, the Minoans, and then the Near Eastern areas along the Eastern Mediterranean seaboard, in the area which is now Lebanon in particular. That's, of course, where the geometric pottery the Greeks will be exposed to the geometric designs on the pottery and will later copy that when they create their own pottery. And now, of course, the Egyptian based statuary that the Greeks will copy, and again, giving rise to this, not a very lifelike form, but nevertheless, the Archaic Age, old fashioned age, is going to be based upon the type of art that archaeologists have recovered that can be datable to this 250-year span from 750 to 500 BCE. Okay, so now that we have discussed the origins of the term archaic and its connection with art history, we'll begin the unit proper by noting that this period, this Archaic Age, is keenly important in the history of Greek civilization, in part because it does represent the rebuilding phase. With the catastrophe, the destruction of the Bronze Age Mycenaean civilization, the Greeks basically have to reinvent what civilization means and what it will mean moving forward. And it's during the Archaic Age that the foundational components are laid down. And in this unit, we'll look at the three pivotal developments. We will look at the development, first of all, of the polis as a means of organizing societies politically, culturally, economically. And the polis, of course, the term itself means city-state, will be the building block by which the Greeks will organize themselves for the next several centuries. And related to the development of the polis is the process of overseas colonization that the Greeks will begin during this archaic period, perhaps a little earlier, but certainly during the Archaic Age, colonization really does pick up steam. And third and finally, in this unit, we'll take a look at the development of a way of warfare that will be uniquely Greek. And I'm talking here about the creation of warriors known as hoplites, who will also be citizens of the city-states that will develop during this period. And the hoplites will recognize that they have rights as citizens, but they also have responsibilities, and their key responsibility will be to defend the polis. And this hoplite revolution, as it has been termed, will broaden out political participation amongst the non-elite, amongst the non-aristocratic elements. Those folks who will represent the hoplite class will gain a real voice in the government of their city-states. So let's first begin by looking at the development of the polis, or the city-state, as a model of social, political, and economic organization across Greece. And this, of course, will be probably the most important development of the Archaic period. Now, if we step back for a moment and take a look at how the Mycenaean Bronze Age civilization was organized, we recognize a very centralized and very stratified society. And you had a relative few people who were in positions of authority and power, and they lived the good life, and everybody else was sort of answered to this ruling elite. And political representation was very, very limited indeed. Well, when the Mycenaean civilization collapses, the Greeks now have an opportunity to create civilization 2.0, if you will. And this development of the city-state, which is basically an urbanized center that will contain the religious temples, the public spaces, such as the agora, the open market area that will also serve as a kind of a communal assembly area, any kind of government buildings, and the housing for the craftspeople who will not do any farming. Uh, this is the function of the urban area, but surrounding that urban area will be, depending on the size of the polis and the territory it controls, you're either going to be looking at tens or hundreds of miles of farmland that will be farmed by small landowning farmers who will gain a real sense of independence for themselves, but they will also recognize that they are part of a broader network of people. Everybody has to perform their role if indeed the polis is to survive as a viable entity. So the polis is the model of organization, and to belong to a polis, the Greeks craft the idea of citizenship. And this is perhaps the most important development, certainly of the Archaic and into the Classical Age. This notion that free adult males born into the territory controlled by the polis, they will have a voice. Now, I don't want to play this up too much. There still will be some stratification. There still will be those aristoi who are from a more esteemed families. They will hold a certain sway, politically, certainly. But as we'll see here, even the more humble farmer class will have a role to play and a voice. And that role and that voice will only grow as we move our way through the Archaic period, and certainly through this unit when we explore at the end of this lecture what becomes known as the Hoplite Revolution. So the polis itself is the key building block, based on the notion of citizenship that broadens out the possibility of political participation for many, many, many more people than could have hoped to participate during the earlier Mycenaean period. Now, because of Greece's rugged terrain, the geography of Greece is notoriously rugged, divided by mountains, and certainly the sea is a factor in creating a sense, not necessarily of geographical unity, but one of division. And because of the geographic conditions, we will see that hundreds of independent poleis, city-states, will develop throughout Greece. So this will be a broad-based phenomenon. Now, it won't be universal. There will be some areas of Greece, the more notoriously rugged and harsh areas geographically, that will not organize based on the polis. But by far, the most common form of organization will be the city-state. And in a way, the geography, although it's harsh and it's a tough place to make a living, the geography of Greece made it virtually impossible for any broad-based empire to ever develop in ancient Greece. And that, of course, facilitates the development of smaller units of political and social and cultural and economic organization like the city-states. Indeed, this is a satellite image of Greece, and we see, of course, the two dominant peninsulas, the Peloponnese and the Attic. And of course, up here is an area called Boeotia, and this is mainland Greece, and further to the north is Macedonia. But this image gives you a sense of just how rugged and rocky and mountainous the geography of Greece is. And of course, that's how the city-state becomes the preferred model. You control a limited area, and you're always looking to expand as a city-state. So as we'll see here momentarily, warfare becomes endemic because again, Greece agriculturally is fertile farmland is at a premium. So the city-states were often competing and fighting against one another to expand their own territory. Now, one age-old remedy for peoples who are dealing with a homeland that is limited in natural resources and fertile farmland, one way to remedy those deficiencies is to expand your holdings well outside the boundaries of your traditional homeland. And that process of overseas colonization is going to be adopted by the Greeks. And as you can see from this map, Greek colonists will go well beyond the traditional boundaries of what is considered Greece in the ancient period. And this makes sense because we see that once things begin to settle down after the Dark Age and the Archaic Age is underway, we might imagine that as organization is better, and that will facilitate the stability of a food supply, we'll see populations begin to grow. And as I just mentioned, Greece itself has very, very limited fertile farmland. It's very hard pressed to support a growing population. Something has to be done with people who are going to be looking for opportunities. And the most adventuresome of these people will willingly take on the mission of colonizing other areas. And some of the locations that we are familiar with already, the western coast of Turkey, what is now Turkey, what was then considered Asia Minor. This area becomes known as Ionia because during the latter phase of the collapse of Mycenaean civilization, we see many of those refugees, if you will, leaving the turbulent areas of the Peloponnese and moving eastward through Athens and then across the Cycladic Islands until they establish this Greek fringe area that the Greeks will refer to as Ionia. So this idea of taking to the sea and relocating has certainly a long history to it for the Greeks by the time we get to the Archaic period. But what is, in many ways, what is breathtaking in it is the scope of this overseas migration. And you can see from these purple graph images that we will have Greeks setting up outposts as far away as what the Greeks refer to as the Pillars of Hercules here, now the Straits of Gibraltar, along coastal Spain, going eastward, northeastward into the Black Sea. And this makes sense because this area was notoriously fertile. With the soil was extremely rich, and the Greeks set up many farming communities that would later export grain down through the Bosporus, through the Dardanelles into the Aegean, and send back grain shipments to their mother city states, their metropolis, the mother polis that had originally sent out these colonists. So what happens over time, of course, is that you get this vast economic network to develop throughout the Black Sea, the Aegean, into the broader Mediterranean. And this, of course, will facilitate an economic expansion of just about every Greek city-state's economy. Because there is a sort of a pattern of looking at what your neighbor is doing, and if your neighbor is benefiting from sending some of the surplus population out to harvest grain or other resources in other parts of the Mediterranean, then you will follow suit. So the Greeks really do take to the sea in a very big way, and this will enhance the overall prosperity of the Greek mainland, when ordinarily that wouldn't be the case because of the limited natural resources that are available to the Greeks in their traditional homeland. And so this process of overseas colonization presents the Greeks with a type of safety valve by which they can relocate surplus populations. But we now have to shift our focus back to the Greek mainland because, of course, that's where most of the population will remain. And as I mentioned earlier, Greece is a harsh land with very limited resources and certainly limited farmland. So that will trigger endemic competition and endemic warfare amongst the Greek polis, each looking to expand its holdings at the expense of its neighbor. And that brings us back to the nature of citizenship in the Greek polis and the rights and responsibilities of the citizen were based around the notion that none of these rights will be in play if the polis cannot survive. So the responsibility of the citizen has to be to defend the polis against all enemies. And this, of course, is going to create a system whereby showing up on the battlefield becomes an important prerequisite to garnering for yourself greater political representation and a greater voice in government. And these factors will come together in what is broadly referred to by scholars as the Hoplite Revolution. Now, there are several theories regarding the Hoplite Revolution and how it took place and what actually took place. I'm going to pick from the various prominent theories and try to put together a coherent narrative for you, because this really is kind of an important process that will allow the Greeks ultimately to extend power or project power well beyond the territorial boundaries of what is considered Greece. And here I'm thinking of the last unit you and I will cover together, the Macedonians. Alexander the Great, in particular, will create the largest land empire in history, in part because of the ingredients that are going to come into play during this hoplite revolution process. So this is going to be an important long-term development, not only in the history of warfare, but certainly in the history of Greece. So here it goes anyway. Um, Political participation in the Mycenaean period was determined by showing up on the battlefield. But the commoners were largely kept away, certainly from having a primary role in any battle that took place during the Mycenaean period. Indeed, the nobility, the aristoi, had the resources, the wealth, to outfit themselves in protective equipment, bronze equipment, that was very expensive and was out of the economic reach of the ordinary person. So, with the various protective gear, as well as horses and chariots. Chariots were a key component in Bronze Age warfare. Again, this was all very, very expensive, and only the aristoi could afford it. Uh, the aristocrats are able to perform on the battlefields and therefore claim political legitimacy for themselves and themselves alone, keeping everybody else in a subordinate status. And in the Homeric epics, we have to look no further than that dialogue between Sarpedon and Glaucus that we used in an earlier assignment, in which both of these aristoi basically note that the reason that they can claim a privileged political status, as well as all the resources and goodies that come from that, is that they are promachoi, they are frontline fighters. And this is the way it will be for centuries, where battles are going to be relatively small scale affairs, fought out by aristocratic champions representing each of their palaces in the case of the Mycenaean period, and everybody else cannot claim a voice in government because, quite frankly, they don't have any skin in the game. They have not shed blood on behalf of the society. So again, this notion of showing up on the battlefield being a prerequisite for political representation becomes a motivator for the smaller landowning farmers, the middle classes, the middling classes, to begin showing up on battlefields with the equipment that they have available. Now, quite frankly, we see the availability of iron facilitating this process because bronze had again been a very expensive material to make armor and weapons out of, and that put weapons out of the hands of the less wealthy citizens of an area. And when iron becomes available, that is cheaper. It's more available, and we see more people with less resources being able to use iron weapons to show up. And again, depending on the scholar who you read, this process could have begun as early as 800 BC. Some scholars, though, believe you have to go down to about 650 BC before you start to see these farmers showing up on the battlefield with certain key pieces of gear and organizing themselves in such a way that it becomes the standard trademark method of warfare for the Greeks. And one key piece of evidence in dating the Hoplite Revolution is what's referred to as the Chigi vase, and this was an artifact found in Etruria in northern Italy and the Etruscan area of Italy, and it has been dated to 650 BC. And here you see an image taken from that vase, and what you see here is a group of hoplites organized in what will become their trademark formation, the phalanx. So we'll look at that in a moment. And they are keeping pace and gauging their speed thanks to the help of a flute player here who is helping them regulate their march. So this Chigi vase, again dated to 650 BC, gives us a hoplite phalanx formation in its operational mode. And the artist who painted this must have been familiar enough with the whole concept of hoplite warfare that he could do this by 650 BC. So, with the aid of modern illustration, let's take a look at what made these hoplites so formidable ultimately on the battlefield, and how did they cause a paradigm shift in ancient warfare away from the more mobile, fluid battles fought by Aristoi in chariots towards a more infantry-based, confrontational, mass movement type of exercise that hoplite battles became. Now, what you see here is the hoplites in various positions and stances with their key pieces of gear. The most important part of a hoplite's panoply, his gear, was the hoplon, which was a round, bronze-faced, concave shield with a very unique grip that we'll take a look at in a moment. But this type of shield would be worn on the left of the warrior who wielded it, and it would protect roughly half of the warrior, and would spill over and protect the right side of his neighbor. And this shield, of course, was heavy enough where a special grip called an Argive grip had to be developed in order for this to work. And the Argive grip, which you see here, allowed for the hoplite to thrust his left arm through the center up to the elbow, so his elbow would be here, and then his left hand would grasp this handhold here. And this allows, because this is a very heavy shield, this allows for various muscle groups to be brought into carrying such a burden. You have of course, your deltoids, your pectorals, your various other muscle groupings necessary to wield this thing, certainly to keep it up at eye level. And again, this would protect part of you and part of your neighbor as he scrunched to protect his right side with the very left side of your shield. And this, of course, made the phalanx formation a related development. You can't really fight as an individual with such a heavy, unwieldy piece of gear. So scholars believe that contemporaneously with the development of the hoplon as a shield with the Argive grip, this also necessitated the creation of what becomes known as the phalanx formation. Now, another key piece of gear that was worn by the Greeks, the Greek hoplites, would be the Corinthian helmet. And as you can see here, it doesn't have any ear holes. It's very claustrophobic. You can see, I guess, barely, but your head and face are very well protected. But because there are no ear holes, we have to surmise that the hoplites fought a very direct and simplistic type of battle. There was no ability to hear multiple commands being shouted out at you in the din of battle. So hoplite battle must have been a very straight ahead affair, as indeed the depictions of hoplite battles indicate. And of course, we have here in illustrated form the hoplites in phalanx with their Corinthian helmets, their hoplons, their shields, and their 8 or 9 foot long thrusting spear. They would not throw the spear because, again, remember, these hoplites are men on a budget. They are middling class of farmers. They do not want to have to throw away part of their wealth by throwing away the spear. So their preferred method of fighting is to thrust with the spear and hold on to it and attempt to inflict wounds upon the enemy in the rival phalanx. And that's part of this story, is that once the phalanx is developed as a formation here, okay, you cannot effectively fight against it if you are in a more looser formation. And of course, the phalanx is very handy in dissuading horses from charging you down. No horse wants to willingly charge into a wall of shields and spears. So again, we're looking at a formation that is largely impervious from the front. Of course, it can be outflanked or it can be taken in the rear. But hoplite warfare, as scholars believe it evolved, was also very ritualistic in the sense that if you are representing your city-state, your polis, and you are going out to meet a neighboring polis that is intruding on some of your farmland, you are fighting by the same set of rules. And again, there are some scholars that believe the types of battles, the hoplite phalanx battles, were very ritualized indeed. So this turns into a clash of phalanxes that it depends largely on brute strength and the will to endure. And the type of courage necessary to charge ahead no matter what. Indeed, there have been scholars, Victor Davis Hanson comes to mind, who takes the perspective of what it must have been like to participate in one of these battles. We might note that the first three ranks of a phalanx, and usually the phalanx was 8 ranks deep, and we'll talk a little bit in a moment about what these other 5 ranks may have been up to when the first 3 ranks came into contact with the opposing phalanx, because the spears, the dories as they were called, being an average of 8 feet, only the first 3 ranks could extend their spear points out in any hope of doing damage to the opposing ranks of the enemy phalanx. So we have the accounts of various poets, Archilochus and Tertius, who really give us a graphic view of what hoplite warfare would have been like, particularly for those on the front ranks, because the whole idea is to try to tear a hole in the opponent's phalanx by killing members of the first 3 ranks of that phalanx, and then driving a wedge, and that ultimately over time would cause your opponent's phalanx to collapse, and then they would flee the field, and you of course would be the victor, and you could retain possession of that land that was being fought over. So it was a very bloody affair, certainly for those frontline fighters. And as far as what the other ranks were doing, well, there is a theory that hoplite battles were very much like rugby scrums, in the sense that while you have the first 3 ranks of each of the phalanxes jabbing at each other with the spears, the back 5 ranks of each of the phalanxes is literally pushing their comrades forward in an attempt to, again, disrupt and create holes in the enemy's phalanx that could be exploited and ultimately cause your opponent's phalanx to collapse. This is a theory called the othismos theory of hoplite warfare, and othismos itself is a word that is a Greek term that translates roughly as to push. And the big debate about this is whether or not this should be taken literally or figuratively. Do we literally believe that these back 5 ranks were jamming their shields into the backs of the front 3 ranks guys and literally propelling them into the enemy phalanx, literally embedding them in the enemy phalanx? Should we understand that literally or figuratively, to push basically being a literary term to try to drive the enemy away? So there, it really is a raging debate over the Othismos theory of hoplite warfare, and a lot of other aspects of this. But like I said a few minutes ago, I've taken some of the broader strands of this hoplite theory and brought it together in what I hope is a coherent narrative. Now, finally, what we should note is, again, the hoplites themselves, these middling farmers, by showing up on battlefields and by showing the kind of courage and bravery that the Aristoi thought only they were capable of. They gain the respect of their wealthier aristocratic citizens, and therefore, with this respect, that will translate in a practical manner as a greater participation, a greater voice in government. And this does become sort of the cornerstone of citizenship in the ancient Greek polis. Do you show up on the battlefield? Do you are you willing to shed blood in defense of the polis?